Okay, so great. Today we have a very great presentation, and that's from Nese Sreenivasulu. He is the Grain Quality Center, head of the Grain Quality Center in IRI International Rice Research Institute, as well as leading the Center for Rice and Value Addition at ISAR Varanasi, IRI South Asia Regional Center. So I mean, to just give you a brief intro of Nese, he's been a prolific writer and publishing at the top journals, both in genome related aspects and enzyme related aspects in his earlier profession. But recently, when after moving to IRI, his focus is blending that genome research into grain quality and food system work, and his recent publications are into that space, and that's getting a lot of traction. To give you a quick summary about how he developed the grain quality center at IRI. When he started, I think he's the only one person or two person. I don't remember exactly, and now he has more than 40 people in his team with a great science, great facilities, and state-of-art kind of labs, both established in at the IRI headquarters as well as in the IRI South Asia Regional Center for Varanasi. So he is been writing a lot of articles, publications around the grain quality and nutritional benefits, and more focusing on rice. And during his research in his tenure in IRI, he established a niche domain and understood how those parameters like nutritional dimensions, health dimensions to be integrated in the breeding programs in IRI, and able to develop quite good improvements in terms of new germplasms, new innovations in this domain, and it's a time to scale up some of those activities. So today he would be discussing most of his work in this domain, how to bridge the health and nutrition benefits, wherein he primarily discuss around some of the myths that is been popular in and around rice, eating rice to in TAFSSA context, and then how that could be looked at in a very scientific way, and what are those myths that could be moved out and integrate some of those issues, that specifically the diet issues into the rice staple food. So I'm not explaining more about him because he's very popular, and his science is well known, and he's rated as one among the top 10 researchers in the world in this domain. So I request Nasser to give his short presentation. The presentation will be around 30 minutes, and I encourage all the participants to write your questions, comments in Q&A section. And yeah, most welcome, Nasser, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prakashan, for a comprehensive introduction. And again, special thanks to TAFSSA. It's indeed actually great to connect here through TAFSSA platform. So today, what I would really like to do is, highlight some of the key progress, what has been made in the staple crop like rice. Generally, it has been serving the calories, and it has been a staple crop for food security related issues. But lately we have been looking through how can we bring the missing nutrition into rice, what are the opportunities which we can leverage without compromising the consumer preferences. So the title of my talk is actually bridging the health and nutritional benefits through staple rice. So yeah, basically at IRI, we have four major mandates. One is actually to assure the global rice supplies through breeding, through agronomy and precision-based agronomy technologies. And then, of course, contributing those varieties, we can help actually reduce the poverty and hunger. primarily that has been done through a green revolution. And lately also, the focus on improving the health of rice farmers and consumers becomes a prime mandate. And of course, while we grow the staple crops, then we also need to look into its environmental sustainability. That's where climate mitigation strategies and lowering the carbon emission and all becomes very important. So those are primary 4 pillar mandates of IRI. And basically, we also have brought actually the facilities to the region, and we have established IRI South Asia Regional Center in 2019. And the facilities have been built between 2017 to 2019. And one of the primary mandates of ISARC is actually increasing the farmers' income and also, bring actually the rice value addition opportunities, connecting value chain stakeholders, and really looking not just as a table rice, but leveraging on all other value chain opportunities around that. So that has been the primary mandate of Center of Excellence for the Rice Value Addition. So let's really look at the kind of diet in our plate. So if you really look into South India or Bangladesh or Philippines or Vietnam, rice is actually the major staple, and it primarily comprises nearly 40 to 50% in our plate. And quite often we miss actually the diversity. So we really need to make sure that along with the starch, we need to have the protein, vitamins, minerals, which can come from basically the vegetables, fruits, and all other diverse crops. But low and middle income people, they cannot afford these things. So that has been one of the key challenges why we really need to think about at least bringing in part of the missing nutrition. On the other hand, in the Western foods, we clearly see that they are all highly processed. It's rich in carbohydrate, sugar, and when we really look into fat, then we have to really take into consideration enriching unsaturated fatty acids. So those are actually the kind of challenges, and that led actually to the two-dimensional challenge. So one is actually increasing basically the obesity and diabetes. We clearly see that as of now, 2 billion adult people, they are obese, and nearly 460 million people that are type 2 diabetic. And equivalent number we have also seen in the malnutrition area, where people are lacking iron, zinc, vitamin A, folic acid. So, and this is actually a kind of a, a dimension which we really need to address, the double burden of nutritional issues. And so one primary concern quite lately is, that around 463 million people who are type 2 diabetic, by another 10 years or so, we would expect that it would grow by 700 million. And that has been a very linear increase. As you could see here, that in 1980s, it's around 108 million. We are here today with 463 million, and it's going to grow to 700 million. And primarily, if you see the population density, either in China or India, that is also being confounded with more than 10% of the population being diabetic. And of course, USA is also standing in the third position. So clearly, when we think of food, not just for meeting our requirements in terms of energy, but we also have to be using basically enriching the nutritional density over there. And so at moment, we clearly see that rice is related to life in Asia. It provides energy. And at the same time, there are several codes being drawn in, and some of them could be myths, some of them could be having truth. So some of those claims has been listed here. Brown rice is healthier than white rice. Rice lacks micronutrients. Rice is full of heavy metals. Rice has no protein or low quality protein. And rice makes you fat. Rice causes diabetes. So quite obviously, many of those statements might be, has to be reviewed based on the scientific evidence. hopefully today I will show you some of those leading evidences what we were getting through doing research around rice. So when we really look into the composition, it is clear that carbohydrates are the major purpose of having them in rice. Nearly, we need around 225 grams of carbohydrates every day, and taking actually 3 times, that will actually serve the purpose. On the other hand, when we really look into protein, we require around 50 grams, and obviously we can reach or maintain at least half of the requirement, and other half can actually comes from legumes and other sources. But the key challenge is lack of dietary fiber. You could clearly see that requirement is around 30 grams, and we do have very little dietary fiber, which is one of the major problem even in the Western countries. And of course, both vitamins and minerals, they do represent at a very little amount, except manganese, which is already provided, through rice. So looking at those daily requirements of nutritional requirements, we have derived actually strategies. So on the left side, we have clearly shown that dietary fiber and resistant starch in rice, we have only 0.5% to 1%, starch up to 90%, protein 6 to 8%. And we set a target to really have dietary fiber or resistant starch going all the way between 5 to 9%. And that has to be a specialty rice, because if we would add more of fiber into milled rice, then that can actually change the texture. And at the same time, if we really have to lower the glycemic index, then we have been really looking into changing the amylopectin composition in a way which where we could really lower the glycemic index, make it like a diabetic friendly rice. And this is actually the kind of composition what we recommend to bring it into the varieties. And on the other hand, protein, easily we can move from 8% to 12% without changing texture. And that will really benefit a lot, being the staple food over there. And as part of specialty rices, there is enough diversity where we can enrich flavonoids or anthocyanins. So having good source of antioxidants will be very beneficial. So we have actually put in a strategy, what ideal rice should look like in terms of multi-nutritional properties. So the primary target is many of the rice varieties, they are very high in its glycemic index. And so we need to convert them into either low or intermediate glycemic index so that we can really continue to use that as a high quality starch, and bring in solutions over there. And second is actually look into the requirement of dietary fiber, enhance the protein with essential amino acids, or basically antioxidants or vitamins and micronutrients. And above all, ensuring that there are no heavy metals or minimum amount of pesticides to be used in a sustainable manner, which is really a requirement for the food safety aspects. Of course, when we really mill the rice, on one hand, many of the nutritional traits will be lost. But on the other hand, we also will be losing many of those heavy metals and pesticides, which could be a good practice over there. So how do we really find that balance is actually the key question, what we have been addressing in our research program. So when we really look into one dimension of bringing the missing nutrition, then we also have been looking into the markets, and we have come up with basically the forecast. So as you could see here that when we have a long grain translucent rices, which is the most preferred rice, clearly the market value is around 400 to 450 US dollars per metric ton. And if it is broken, then basically we lose nearly $100. Whereas premium can be paid for high quality rices such as aromatic rice with elongation properties such as basmati rice, or jasmine rice like Thai Homali, where it can fetch up to $1,000. But if there is a very high breakage, then you see that the value both in terms of jasmine as well as in basmati can drop to half of it. So we really need to be making sure that the varieties what we breed would have minimum breakage, and that would have the nice texture as well as elongation properties with aroma. And quite lately, we have seen that some of the pigmented rices, when it is grown either with organic or with minimum pesticides, then there is a premium being created. Whether it's a red rice or black rice, clearly, consumers are willing to pay high, and it can really reach anywhere between 1200 USD to 1500 USD. And among the topmost criteria for paying premium is really the low glycemic index rice, which is a diabetic friendly rice, where one of the brands from Australia has been capturing really this market. It can basically fetch around 1600 to 1700 US dollars. So clearly we really need to look into the demand and then see how can we really in progress these kinds of triads and then come up with varieties which can meet the requirement of consumers is one of the priority areas for us. So how did we do? Is like basically whenever we have missing genes or haplotypes in our modern breeding lines, we go back actually to the gene bank. ERI hosts more than 128,000 accessions. So we are basically using that as a starting point to screen the diversity. And then we undertake the gene discovery. Once we do have the triads or genes being linked to the triads, then we can clearly take them into kind of precision breeding strategies to bring actually the missing nutrition. And likewise, we also have been addressing some of the premium grain quality attributes. So while we have been working more on breeding strategies to bring the missing nutrition, then most of that work has been happening here in the IRI headquarters, whereas in the region, then we have established the Center of Excellence for the Rice Value Addition, where we do have series of analytical platforms which will really help us to understand food safety issues. And we also have the product development lab where we have been prototyping various food products to be made from the rice bran or from the broken rice, so that there is really a value addition which could be captured over there. And that is one of our entry point in TAFSSA, where we are looking into prototyping not only traditional food product prototypes, but also some new entry points of value added food products. So going back actually to this diabetic friendly rice, when we screened actually a large germplasm, then we noticed that many of the varieties are including the germplasm of gene bank lines. They either have very high or high glycemic index, but then when we have been really fixing the varieties at the intermediate amylose levels, then we could clearly see that the glycemic index vary a lot from almost intermediate to high. And the three red dots, what I have shown here is actually the three low GI donors, what we identified by screening through in vitro glycemic index method. And then once we did identify those donors, then we conducted actually the clinical trials on the human subjects, both here in Philippines as well as in Australia subjects. And we could clearly notice that, the glycemic index value of these donors, one is 50 and the other one was around 51. So the low GI criteria should meet at least 55 or below, in order to really bring health benefits to the consumers. And through this, we also have sequenced actually many of these varieties, and we were able to kind of discover the genes, and we did identify important genes, and through that we can now take up precision pre-breeding approaches. And so here is an example where when we really breed low GI rices, then we want to make sure that the texture of these rices are pretty much in an acceptable fashion. And here are actually the three low GI rices where we subjected that to the test panels. And then basically we were able to describe the textural parameters. The gray shade is actually the kind of high quality line which is used in Southeast Asia called Dinarado. And as you could clearly see here that the initial starch coating of Dinarado values are very high. And one of this low GI line actually meets the textural property as the high premium quality with the soft textured rice. Whereas the other two lines, basically they would have low values and that would be meeting the requirement of South Asia. So using these strategies, now we have developed several of the pre-breeding lines with low GI property, and we have been testing for its yield. And clearly, as you could see here, that we were able to identify the low GI rice as a diabetic friendly rice with different maturities. Some of them are early maturing, some of them they are long matured lines. And clearly, as of now, 3.12 billion US dollar low GI rice market has been established, and it is expected to grow by 5% per year. And the low GI donors, what we have identified, they are in the medium slender and long slender background. And interestingly, many of them, they are in this intermediate amylose levels ranging between 22 to 25. So that actually serves the purpose. Not only it meets the requirement of texture, but they are, moderate yielding. The yield is ranging between 4.33 tons until 7 tons. So these are actually some of the diabetic friendly rices we really like to introduce in India. And at the moment, those varieties have been released in Philippines, and through Seeds Without Border policy, we would like to bring it to at least 10 countries who are the signatory countries of Seeds Without Border policy. So we have been kind of continuing the gene discovery to identify high resistant starch related genes. And here is actually one more genetic region we identified on chromosome 6.2 region, at starch synthase 2A and protein phosphatase gene was identified to be a critical factor to increase resistant starch. And here is actually one of such donor line where we found that up to 9% of resistant starch could be found. And this is a particular donor where yield was extremely low. So now we are able to use this as a donor and improve breeding lines with high resistant starch property. So as you could clearly see here that through precision breeding approaches, that we are able to convert high GI rices into an ultra low glycemic index rice where a median of 35 and many cases lines GI could reach up to 21. And whereas all other inferior haplotype related lines, the GI is around 75 to 80. And interestingly, that we have changed actually the branching of these panicles by combining one of the yield enhancement genes. And clearly you could see that the branching of the panicles have been changed compared to the other line. So just with those combinations of SNPs, now we are able to overcome the yield barrier and at the same time have actually these ultra low GI properties, which we are now positioning to make various food products out of those rice varieties. And this is how it looks like. Basically, we were able to again bring the ultra low GI lines into different maturity background, and many of them are performing pretty well. And here is actually a picture where our board chair visited, and he has been inspecting these lines, these ultra low GI related lines. So we are also exploring other processing technologies to further reduce the GI wherever it is necessary. And through basically steaming and inducing the retrogradation properties, we can further lower the GI. And those are some of the technologies we are using to make extruded products from such specialty rices, where using the low GI rices, we are able to prototype for noodles, cake, as well as traditional, like dosa and several other aspects. And also we were able to kind of find one interesting line. It's red rice. Generally, most of the flavonoids have been retained in the bran, but when we mill it, most of them, we lose them. But here, interestingly, we found actually a genetic region on chromosome 7, where total flavonoid content is very, very high in the milled rice as well as in the brown rice. And interestingly, the glycemic index property, we are able to basically reduce it compared to other inferior haplotype. So interestingly, this particular gene, not only it maintains higher catechin content in the milled endosperm, but also it alters actually the glycemic index. So where we are able to lower the glycemic index property while maintaining higher antioxidants. And interestingly, when we have tested these lines with haplotypes, having haplotype 4, where catechin content was able to we were able to increase, and those lines exhibited anti-cancerous properties such as colon cancer, cell line cytotoxicity assay was comparable to controls like zeocin, whereas inferior haplotype lines, it doesn't have any such property. Likewise, for liver cancer, breast cancer, and all, we found that just with 2 genes, we were able to enrich catechin content, which exhibit anti-cancerous properties. So we have been using basically, the bran extracted out of that, and we are making actually a nutraceutical supplements, and we are able to enrich the catechin, and we are coming up with a prototype where overarching framework could be derived for nutraceutical properties using rats. And of course, deploying those kinds of pigmented rices, we are able to make various product prototypes, the black rice as well as brown rice. So, ice creams and cookies and all have been made in terms of various prototypes. And interestingly, one of the traditional products is actually the pop rice. And there we were able to kind of clearly notice that when we pop it in a traditional way, then many of the varieties, whatever we have been using in the popping process, the dietary fiber is around 5.64%, which was pretty high. And also we were able to clearly see that iron content, we were able to enrich, because the way how we pop the rice with the traditional method, it's able to increase actually the iron content. As you could clearly see here, this is a regular paddy rice, and when we soak and then when we pop it under the iron pans, basically we clearly see, independent of any variety being used, the iron content has been increased. So this is probably one of the value proposition that our historically the kind of food products what we have been making, it's able to really increase the iron content, and we clearly notice that iron content can go between 12 to 13 ppm, irrespective of any variety what we have been using, and that's quite a substantial development. And we can reposition and rebrand some of the traditional products which are relevant for Asia. And likewise, we also have taken up actually looking into the strategies to enrich multiple minerals. And clearly, we were able to find some important donors where iron content can be increased up to 11 ppm, whereas zinc content on an average, we were able to find 22 to 24 ppm levels were found. And likewise, we also have seen an enrichment for copper as well as basically manganese. So you can clearly see that manganese enriched lines on an average, they're having 40 ppm or so. So this clearly shows that still within rice, when we really discover the diversity and identify the genes, we are able to find the important donors, and all those missing nutritional densities could be reintroduced through breeding strategies in near future. And so some of these donors, what we have identified, we then kind of wanted to make sure that in addition to minerals, whether there is any change in the heavy metal concentrations. Clearly, we don't see that neither arsenic nor cadmium or chromium have been accumulating in these rices. But at the same time, those donors have been enriched for iron on an average of 10 to 11 ppm, whereas manganese can go up to 14 to 15 ppm, with few lines going up to 30 to 40 ppm, whereas zinc is around 24 ppm. So these are actually the kind of opportunities to enhance the mineral nutrient content. And at the same time, we also have developed fortification technologies using ultrasonication method. And here we particularly looked into enriching folic acid. And here we were able to enrich 4,054 folds in the fortified rices. And these fortified rice grains can be mixed into any regular rices. And here we have compared one part fortification, stepwise fortification. And even in milled rice, we were really able to enrich up to 4,000 plus folds. And clearly, when we look into the same method has been applied for enriching iron, and after ultrasonication, we clearly see that iron content has been present in milled endosperm, but basically it is still retaining in the middle to outer layers over there. And here you could clearly see that even when we took high iron rice donor like up to 11 ppm, we were able to increase through fortification up to 320 ppm, and even after cooking, it retains around 266 ppm, and that's actually a pretty big advantage. And at the same time, when we do ultrasonication, then the P levels would go down. Generally, this would chelate iron and doesn't really help for bioavailability. But at least with this kind of a strategy, we are able to reduce the P levels and we are able to increase substantially the iron content. So I hope I was able to kind of show you that we do have enough opportunities in staple crop like rice. On one hand, actually, to increase the dietary fiber or resident starch, or to lowering the GI through amylose amylopectin composition manipulation. And we are also now really looking at the strategies to change the protein content. All of that will help actually prevent non-communicable diseases, prevent colorectal cancer, as well as position some of these specialty rices actually to address double burden nutritional content. On the other hand, there is a success of mainstreaming zinc content in rice, where some of the biofortified rices in finding background nearly 22 to 24 ppm has been enriched, and that's already can take care of requirement of zinc, whereas the most essential vitamins and mineral like folic acid or iron, we still recommend as a short-term intervention to go with the fortification technology. And here, we were able to enrich basically 165 milligram of folic acid, where we just need to mix 2.4 grams of fortified rice kernel into a kilogram of any choice of your rice, and that can actually meet the requirement of folic acid. And likewise for iron, we were able to enrich by 321 milligrams per kg. And here we need to mix approximately 46 grams for a kilogram of rice. So these are the kind of opportunities. And other team at ERI, they have successfully developed golden rice to enrich vitamin A. And right now several varieties have been developed over there, and they have been growing those varieties. So through these examples, I hope I was able to kind of show that there are two different opportunities for us moving forward. One is we could continue to promote wherever diversification would exist, promoting vegetables, fruits together with staple crop in an ideal way. Whereas for low and middle income related people, we have to look within staple crops because it's more sustainable. And that's where we could really replace some of these specialty rices like diabetic friendly rice or rices enriched for zinc or iron content, and continue to leverage technology, including fortification as short-term interventions. And particularly these specialty rices we need to deploy when we think of making processed food products for different consumer requirement. And that will really help us really to look into the issue of complex carbohydrates to maintain high quality starch. And on the other hand, we also have to have a comprehensive strategy for enriching proteins with essential amino acids, where cereals, legumes, germinating sprouts, nuts, fish, and all could be tapped in. And likewise for minerals and vitamins, we should continue to promote vegetables and fruits. So I hope now, like I was really able to show that there is enough opportunity now, even with milled rice, if you would mainstream some of these products and position them as nutritious varieties. So, and at the same time, when we really want to promote brown rice, we absolutely need to be sure that that there are areas which are not contaminated with heavy metals has to be chosen to grow. And if possible, maybe we also need to grow under minimum pesticides. And of course, as it stands right now, many of the popular varieties do lack micronutrients, but there is an opportunity both using fortification and biofortification strategy. And rice is full of heavy metals. Um, that could be true if we are really looking into the soils which are contaminated, but by and large, biofortified rice varieties doesn't really carry heavy metals based on our data, and that could be confidently promoted. So yeah, in fact, like the claims like rice makes you fat or rice causes diabetes, they are not really the causal factors, but associated factors. And that's where bringing in these diabetic friendly rices definitely will help to streamline those varieties and bring it into any background. Because of the gene discovery, we can now choose any prominent mega variety and we can convert that into a diabetic friendly rice. So moving forward, what we have really done is we have introduced the huge diversity. We have undertaken the discovery. We will accelerate precision breeding methodologies to bring the missing nutritional factors, enrich basically the nutrients over calories. And at the same time, we also have to work with a lot of clinical experts, and we really need to go towards One Health strategy, particularly continue to utilize antioxidant enriched rices, enriched for vitamins and minerals, and then continue to use that as part of intra-species diversification. So, as part of a future health strategy, of course, calories are important, but we need to look into the quality of starch in order to really develop diabetic friendly rice, but also at the same time enriching nutrients, antioxidants, micronutrients, vitamins, and fiber is going to be critical, particularly to address non-communicable diseases. And we do have opportunity to take up those initiatives in near future. I hope that those are some examples where we could really position staple rice as a relevant, not only for addressing food security, but also for nutritional security related issues in near future. And moving forward, we need to bring partnership and we need to work towards UN sustainable goals. While we work for no poverty or no hunger, we absolutely need to focus about good health and well-being. So yeah, I think this has been made possible because of various important funding, including CGR, IDTs, and several other bilateral funding what we got over a period of time. And also Indian government has been investing heavily in India for us to really not only set up facilities, but also take all the way, breeding nutritious rice varieties and positioning them to make value-added food products. And of course, with the community members from TAFSSA, we really look forward to see what leverages we can bring to the table and work towards enhancing the nutritional aspects in South Asia. So with that, I really would like to thank you for your patience. Would be happy to kind of take up questions. Prakashan, back to you. I hope
Thanks, Nese. I think we are on time. Thanks for an excellent presentation and highlighting the importance of rice. And more importantly, some of those myths, we always hold quite few of those myths, and you, I hope that shown some kind of light to many of us. Okay, what is real fact in that? Is there a fact, or if it is fact, is there a way to address some of those issues? And thanks for that. And you specifically highlighted some of those interventions related to targeted to the low and middle income population, and specifically when we say that through TAFSSA, a good chunk of research is going on sustainable healthy diets and addressing the social safety net programs. So probably this is one dimension we wish to take it forward, how some of those interventions could be directly beneficial to millions of people who are still relying on social safety net programs like our public distribution systems, etc. And at the same time, you also highlighted some other very niche market segments like low GI rice. That's very just opposite of this low and middle income population, and that's also very important growing forward. The rice as their staple food. How can that address some of those important issues like diabetes, anti-cancerous properties, etc. And thanks. And I'm very happy that you also highlight the popped rice, the traditional method, how that can naturally, or the process itself can enrich the iron content. Thanks a lot for this very interesting presentation. And I think there are some questions in the Q&A sections. Majibin, are you reading it out, or do I need to highlight that?
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
read it out,
please.
Prakash. Yeah, the first question asked by Muqsadul Arafat, he asked that what is the yield of brown rice per hectare? So, Dr. Nishi, if you could answer this.
Yeah, so generally brown rice is when we take paddy and then when we dehusk it, basically then the resultant product is actually the brown rice. So that means on an average, basically we lose 10% of during the processing, and that's the only loss what we would expect. So compared to milled rice, basically when we would retain the bran, then nearly additional 10 to 12% weight will be there, and that's actually the kind of overall yield what we would see. So again, in terms of the paddy yield, clearly we have seen that on an average in India, around 3.5 to 4 tons of paddy yield we have observed. And then we could really calculate that, through brown rice strategy, we will be retaining most of the bran and we only lose husk. So that's the calculations what we could extrapolate.
The next question is asked by Mahesh Yathala. He asked that heavy metal content in rice is due to pesticide use or by rice growing environment allow more uptake of heavy metals. What should be the strategies to exclude heavy metals?
Yeah. So, I mean, broadly, as part of food safety, we really need to look into both pesticides as well as heavy metals. So heavy metals are different from pesticides. So generally the pesticides that we kind of use mostly insecticides or fungicides. So when certain rice varieties they are susceptible to diseases, then farmers they use pesticides. Particularly, it happens when we are growing premium quality rices, and so that is where we really need to, on one hand, develop disease-resistant varieties, and then we need to continue to promote using minimum amount of pesticides. Clearly, the EU regulation have been set up about the safe levels. We absolutely need to follow those threshold levels. In terms of heavy metals, generally this problem happens when we grow either wheat or rice or any other crop for that matter. We grow under contaminated soils. There are specific regions like, for instance, part of West Bengal or part of Bangladesh. They are prone to heavy metals, contamination, and that is where I think we absolutely need to be careful to choose actually those types of areas and restrict, not to particularly grow, promote basically the whole grain consumption from those areas. So, yeah, I think clearly there is no co-occurrence between biofortification strategy versus increase of heavy metals. Clearly, we have shown from our data that those biofortified rice varieties do not accumulate heavy metals, but we have to kind of continue to test in various regions, also in the contaminated soils. So that particular work has to be done in near future.
I think Mahesh has a follow-up question,
Yeah,
seems.
he has
Yeah.
raised his
Can
hand.
you
Mahesh, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your great presentations. That Nese, that's just my follow-up questions. That you are saying that biofortified rice didn't find more kind of heavy metals. So do you think that biofortified rice, that there would be some gene or some kind of like, because this heavy metals is related not to soil but also related to the environment, how we are growing. That's more related to as well. So if you grow rice in contaminated soils, in anaerobic conditions, when in puddle condition, then there is a heavy chance and very high chance that absorption is very high in anaerobic conditions of especially arsenic and heavy metals. But if we grow same rice in aerobic condition, that chances of or probability of absorption of heavy metals is significantly reduced. So my question is that you are saying biofortified rice. If you biofortified rice,
I'm not sure I lost the voice, Prakashan.
Hello.
Yeah. We can hear you, Nese.
Okay.
And also hear Mahesh.
So if we grow biofortified rice in same environment, how we exclude that heavy metals? You are saying that biofortified rice have less heavy metals or no heavy metals there. So that means there is some mechanism, or I don't know how we are avoiding those heavy metals in those environments.
Yep. So I mean, clearly, the articulation what I made, really looking into contaminated soils and those regions, that characterization of soil characteristics is one important effort what we really need to do, and then we need to kind of reposition whether those particular contaminated areas, how would we deal? Like for instance, there are certain chelating agents we can use actually to take out basically heavy metals. And also there is quite a bit of research happening, that there are preferential accumulation in the varieties. So most of those heavy metals could be retained in the vegetative tissues, not to be loaded into the grains. So quite a bit of research going on, and we need much more comprehensive understanding about those complexities. And also there are reports, of course, agronomic practices seems to have a variation, as you rightly pointed out, between puddle conditions versus dry direct seeded rice conditions. So I think those mechanisms has to be fully understood, and it requires a lot more research. But at the moment, what we clearly see is when we grew some of these biofortified rices at ISARC in IRI headquarters and all, we did not really see accumulation of heavy metals.
Nese, can I ask a follow-up questions on
Yes,
that?
please.
Okay,
Yeah,
so the heavy metal accumulation and then the nutrition, like the high zinc or manganese or magnesium, that nutrient accumulation, if the metal transport process are similar, if you are breeding for say high zinc varieties, does it mean that you are causing also facilitating the heavy metal accumulation more, or is it different?
No, it's not the case, Prakashan. I mean, basically there are different kinds of transporters: cation transporter, anion transporters. And so we again have to be very specific in looking into those mechanisms. But at least with respect to biofortified zinc enriched varieties, we did not see that causal factor, with heavy metals.
Thank you. I think we just move on to next question. The anonymous attendee, I don't know who is that. I'll read this one, Mahajamin. How do the growing periods vary between the traditional rice varieties and modified rice varieties? Are there any variations in input requirements, for example, fertilizer or irrigations? I think he or she might be alluding to the traditional, the normal varieties versus the specialty rice varieties.
Yes, of course, there is a huge variation. So many of the traditional rice varieties, they are kind of long duration varieties. Whereas when we think about modern varieties, again, IRI has a specific focus in breeding program. So now we have structured our breeding programs into early maturity, medium maturity, and late maturity. So there is enough variation in the maturity. And generally, those are really the targets depending on the ecologies and overlapping stress scenarios. We are positioning those varieties with different maturity conditions. And that kind of an advantage we will not have in the traditional rice varieties. And by and large, many of the traditional rice varieties, they could be poor yielding. So that's where I think continuous, best practices of agronomic
No, I mean,
practices.
I think Nese probably is the question is around, like, for example, the Sorna versus the Kaising variety or low GI varieties. Is there any difference in terms of any input requirements?
No, I think the low GI as well as biofortified enriched zinc varieties, they are already like a modern varieties because we have brought that into high yielding background and we have been breeding those varieties. So it should be treated as elite varieties as well. So, but the only difference is, we are bringing specific trait of introgression into those varieties and positioning that with a clear-cut consumer demand.
Okay, I think hope that answers the question. So there is another question from Stephanie. It's about the level of copper. Is that any concern? Because you indicated in one of the slides about the metal contents. So just I think that's the question.
Maybe
Yeah,
if I specify, sorry,
Yeah,
because
please.
my question wasn't very elaborated. It's you showed that the zinc and the iron is elevated because you want, and that's positive because it's biofortified. But then you managed, for example, the cadmium was not elevated, but then copper was somewhere there in between. And I wonder, well, what is the threshold where we have to be concerned?
Yeah, I think basically, the daily requirement for copper, basically, it's around 900 microgram per day. So that's kind of safer levels. And what we have seen is basically that's below that threshold level. And we really need copper based on the daily requirement, with the targets. And we did not see any red alert over there in these biofortified rice varieties exceeding that daily requirements.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask also my second question that I had?
Yes,
Prakash,
yes, please,
okay?
yes, please. Yeah.
So it was at some point you showed that the rice, the biofortified rice, would be diluted for I don't remember which it was a slide you were showing that it would be diluted to reach the recommended rates of, I don't remember what the two elements were. But then I was thinking, if you need to dilute it now, if we speak of smallholders that mainly keep their own rice to feed the family, if now this biofortified rice has too much of these elements, do we then have to be concerned again that we need to give instruction? Yes, grow this rice, but if you're eating it, mix it with other rice?
No, I think you might have got confused over there. So the biofortified rice varieties that actually requires the daily requirement, zinc, for instance, around 24 ppm, and absolutely those levels are very much required. So there's no need to dilute any concentrations in the biofortified rices. The fortification, what I mentioned, basically that is where we enrich actually the either iron or folic acid, almost like 4,000 folds in case of folic acid content. So the reason why we try to enrich that in the fortified kernels is we can mix with regular rice. So we can actually take a kilogram of any rice variety and then we can mix basically just 2 grams of fortified kernel and mix it, and then that could be used to meet the daily requirement of folic acid. So probably that was the message what I have highlighted.
Yeah, okay, I misunderstood. So that wasn't varieties that have higher contents. That's like the processing and fortification.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Okay, great. So there are 3 more questions. I think we can quickly go through these 3. So when we look at biofortification, do we also consider disease vulnerability in order to reduce the requirements of pesticide use while increasing nutrient content? I think the question is there any significant difference in terms of vulnerability to pest and diseases by doing biofortification?
I think biofortification is a different strategy, and using pesticides is a different requirement. So absolutely, there are very stringent guidelines set by EU as well as many of the target countries, and we really need to follow those strict guidelines. Otherwise, the occurrence of cancer and several other problems would continue to rise. And I think the problem of pesticides is much more pronounced in vegetables than in any of the cereals what we notice. But again, we need to be vigilant about it, and we need to promote actually low usage of pesticides. And biofortification, that's independent of this strategy, where we need to enrich actually the minerals in the grain more so in the milled rices.
So I'm just taking only one more question. That's like, can you highlight the benefit cost ratio of low GI versus the normal rice, fine texture rice? Because one of the slides it says like it fetches the very high premium, and also the demand is increasing by 5%.
Yeah. So I think in general, we could have taken the strategy to promote brown rice compared to milled rice. So of course, there is a difference in the glycemic index property between brown rice versus actually the milled rice, at least by 8 to 10 units. So if we would have had a variety which is like intermediate glycemic index in the milled rice, easily by promoting brown rice, we would have had low GI property. But the challenge over there is when we continue to promote brown rice, not all consumers would be favoring that because of textural properties and longer time what it takes to cook. Plus rancidity related issues are again a major problem. So that's why we have invented this technology of milling and promoting milled rice. And so nearly 90 to 95% of rice consumption is mainly the milled rice. So from that context, if we really have to create a bigger impact across the society, that bringing in low glycemic index rice property into the milled rice and then promote those rices are again important. And so as I showed in our research, we give a lot of emphasis about maintaining the texture while we thrive at developing low glycemic index rice varieties. And that is very, very central to ensure a higher consumer acceptance. So that's where we do all the sensory properties and compare that with standard premium quality rice. And we continue to promote that strategy. Whereas in case of ultra low GI or extreme low GI rices, we would rather position that for specialized processing products. And again, that becomes very important to take actually such high fiber and extreme low GI rices for processing technologies.
I think there is one more question. Sorry for are there any high yielding red rice varieties? Usually in Bangladesh, the current varieties are either half or less than half yielding than the normal varieties. Is there any?
Yeah, I think in general it is true because red rices and black rices, we found them mostly in in the traditional germplasm. And they are low yielding, but now basically we are making efforts because we have discovered the genes not only explaining the antioxidant properties, but also about anti-cancerous properties. And we are also looking at retaining more of antioxidants in the milled rice. So these are the strategies where we will now continue to think about positioning that for pre-breeding activities in near future. So at the moment, we still do not have any high-yielding pigmented rices. We do have those donors, what we have identified from the gene bank.
Thanks, Nese. I think that's the end of the all the questions. So just want to close this by stating one of the research studies. It says that eat rice and get rid of obesity. So that's actually from Japanese researchers Tomako Imai and the team. They looked at in a cross-sectional data, looked at the eating behavior of like rice eating South Asian dominant food versus all other Western countries and other non-rice eating diets. And they found that the rice eating countries have very low incidence of obesity, even after controlling for several other risks associated with the obesity confounders actually in economics. So it's a cross-sectional study. I don't really make big claim on causality, but I think your work highlighted some of those facts into that direction as well. Thanks a lot, and thanks for all others who actively participated in this webinar. And have a nice day, all of you. Thanks, Nese, again.
Thank you, Prakash. Thanks. Thank you.
Bye-bye.